I want to welcome you, everyone, to this Mississippi Board of Education special call meeting. I want to remind you to silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate or whatever we need to do there. We do not have any board members that are live streamed, so we have our quorum of 5 here at the Central High School building on the 4th floor. So this is the Mississippi Board of Education special call meeting, June 14th, 2023. It is 1:00 p.m. At the Central High School building on the 4th floor, MDE, located at 359 North West Street, Jackson, Mississippi. I'd like to call our meeting to order. And I would like to ask Mr. Jacobs to lead us in the pledge and Mr. Miller to lead us in the invocation.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands.
Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to come together. Please guide us as we work through the proposal, budget. Grant us wisdom, understanding of it through this process.
Amen. Again, I want to welcome everyone and also give a word of thanks to the staff for taking care of both of the meetings we've had today and the 2 meetings that we'll have tomorrow. So thank you very much for that work, and also to the board for helping us shuffle through these dates and pull some of these very important projects off in the next couple of days. So thank you for that. You have the agenda before you. May I have an approval for that agenda, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Werner.
Second.
Mr. Miller, thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries. This says FY 2025 overview and presentation of budget request.
Good morning.
Dr. Gavin, you're on.
Morning.
Good morning. I'm sorry. Good afternoon. We are pleased to present to the board our FY 2025 budget request, which will go, it's due to the legislature, to the Legislative Budget Office, August the 1st. So as you guys know, we review the information during the month of June during this work session, but you will actually not vote on it until the month of July. Also will not be included in this budget presentation is the calculation of MAP. We typically don't get that information in time enough to present at this meeting, although we got it yesterday, so we do have preliminary numbers that I will share with you later on, but it will be provided in a formal process in the month of July. So we will go ahead and get started, and on the screen is the agenda, and it's also on page 1 of your booklets. So we have been called to order by Mr. East, and we'll have opening remarks by Mr. Kent, and he will also cover our vision and mission statement and talk a little bit about our 2024 legislative priorities and quickly review what we presented in the year 2023 as well.
Thank you, Dr. Gavin. As always, you begin every meeting and every project and every presentation with a statement of your vision for where the state of Mississippi should be going, and then, of course, your mission statement. And then you always follow that up with the statement of the strategic goals that are in place. These are the things that you're striving to obtain in order to fulfill your mission. And I would like to go then to a review of your legislative priorities. Now, this was for the session that just passed, and what you'll see there is the reappropriation of remaining funding for the MSIS 2.0, as Mr. Craman likes to call it, and that is at the top of the table, and we were successful in that, or top of the page, rather. We were successful in that, and I think you're going to be really, really pleased when you see that working model. The districts are are very pleased with it, what they've seen so far, and so I think that's a really good thing. We had success with continued funding for the early childhood and the math coaches, work keys, etc. And then as you come on down the page, we had less success with the things that, as we moved down, I think I'd like to draw your attention to the full funding of MAEP based on average daily membership. At least the legislature ventured into the ADM thought process with the $100 million that is still it still hasn't been released, but at least it's supposed to, when we finally do send it out, it's supposed to be distributed according to average daily membership. Let me turn on over to page 6, and I want to highlight these ideas because these are the ones that we've spent the most time with most recently during my short tenure. And this is by no means is this an all-inclusive list. This list will grow as moving toward the session, obviously. I do want to highlight the first one there, the Achievement School District and the District of Transformation. There's two different statutes that guide our work as it relates to the underperforming and failing school districts, so the so-called takeovers. And so there's two different laws, and there are some really good things in each one of those and some really bad stumbling blocks in each one of those. And so we are working and spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to either merge the two and get rid of the bad points or fix as much as we can in each one of them. But there's no question that we're going to continue to be challenged with the underperforming districts. Just in the last 2 weeks, the phone is ringing off the hook with school districts that are struggling with various issues such as governance, leadership, and some other areas. So I do want to highlight that one. The school attendance officer transition issue, we continue to move forward, working to move those attendance officers directly under the guidance of local superintendents, and we've done some polling of the superintendents and also some surveys of the school attendance officers themselves, and we're going to share that information with both parties and also with the legislature. Another issue is the renewal of the educator licenses and how whether or not to assess minor fees for those professional licenses in order to maintain the call center where we receive such a tremendous volume of calls and questions every day with people trying to get recertified. So, again, these are the things that have taken up most of our time during my tenure, and obviously we'll be adding to it. Dr. Gavin, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Okay. Before I get started on our FY 2025 fiscal priorities, let me introduce to you Sharon Roselle. She's behind me. She is our state budget director, so she is the one behind the scene crunching all of these numbers, so just wanted to acknowledge her. So as we talk about FY 2025 in terms of what our fiscal priorities are, September fiscal year 2025 will start July of 2024, next year 2024. And September 30th of next year will be the ending of the ARP ESSER funds as we know it. So as you remember, 2020 and 2021, the board approved several projects that we funded with ESSER dollars. So that money will be coming to an end September of 2024. So several other priorities that you see on this screen, we're asking for we will be asking for state funding to replace funds that were, offices that were funded or projects that were funded with ESSER dollars. Of course, we're asking for continued funding for, full funding for MAEP. That's always our ask. Additional funding for school improvement schools, as Mr. Kent mentioned. We're seeing more and more schools districts fall on this line, so we're asking for additional staff in the Office of School Improvement to help us with some of the underperforming school districts there. MCOPS, we're asking for an additional $1 million there, and you'll hear more detail behind these priorities as the chiefs go through their particular areas. We're asking for funding for the licensure call center operation. That number of $759,000, that includes 15 positions that we're asking for, 15 additional people. I think we have 15 to 17 people that man the licensure call center right now, but they're funded with ESSER dollars. And we have a contract with a temp service, and they're currently providing those temporary employees. So we will be asking for permanent general fund funding to hire 15 permanent positions in the call center. And along with that, the MECA system that will be up and running by September 2024, we're asking for an additional $425,000 to support the 4 different portals with the teacher licensure center. Accreditation review team, we ask for this every year. We also ask for the Office of Test Security as well, so that we can be proactive going out to the districts, doing accreditation reviews, as well as doing the testing time, being able to provide staff to go out and monitor any test irregularities in the district. And also, we're asking for an additional $500,000 for the reinstatement of the superintendents and principal academies. One of the things that we hear a lot about is, the leadership needing a lot of PD across the various districts from administrators. And then the MSIS 2.0, we're asking for $3.5 million to continue to support that work. Again, those are various things that have been funded with ESSER dollars, and that funding stream will end September of 2024. So that's a listing of our fiscal priorities, and again, you will hear more details about some of these as the chiefs present their particular areas. To give you an overview of how the Mississippi Department of Education is funded, we have 4 major budgets: the general education budget, we have CTE, we have MEAP, and we have the Chickasaw session. So today we're going to cover all of those areas with the exception of MEAP. As I said, we will present that information to you in July, and we will obviously be requesting full funding. One of the things that you will see with MEAP, an increase in the student-based cost starting next year, July of next year. PERS is increasing the employer's contribution. I think we're going from 17% to maybe 22%. So there will be a 5% increase in PERS that will be included in the calculation of MEAP for the upcoming year. The Mississippi Legislature appropriates our funds by the 5 funding sources that you see. Most of our funds come from the general fund and then EEF. We will not be requesting any funds under the other 3. So 99% of our funds come from between EEF, our education enhancement funds, as well as the general fund. And so our budget request, just in big buckets, the $2.9 billion that you see on the screen is for MEAP, and you can see that out of 100%, 83% of our budget is associated with MEAP. You will often hear that the Department of Education has the largest budget in the state, but you can see 83% of that budget that we receive is actually in MEAP. CTE, we're requesting 93 million, and that's about 3% of our overall ask. And then you have the Chickasaw portion that's by statute. Then under general education, MDE other, direct support to the school district, what's included in that number is the teacher pay raise, our national board, early childhood, pre-K, all those items that are direct support to the district. We outlined that in your general education, MDE other, the 446 million that you see there, and that's about 13% of our budget. Then you move down to the next item, our flow-through items. As you know, after each session, we get a laundry list of flow-through programs, but it's not because the department requests those particular items. As you see there, those are the items that the board in the past has said is priority to the board. So that's $7 million there. Algebra Nation, Amplify Data Coaching, and those listed there make up the other portion of our general education other. And then we have 27 million that we are requesting for our special state schools, the School for Math and Science, School for the Arts, Mississippi School for the Deaf and Blind. And then our SAOs are also included in this $28 million ask. And then you see the last item there is general education MDE operations of 9.5. That's the amount, which is less than 0.5% at this point, that we actually get in state dollars to operate MD operations. So when you take out the amount of funds that we're appropriated that goes directly to the school districts and that go through flow-through, we're left with about $9.5 million that we actually operate in terms of state dollars here at the agency. And on the next slide, it just compares by funding source our 25 budget requests to our FY24 appropriation. And then you come to a total state fund request there. And you can see there, you may ask the question, now the $101 million is less than our current appropriation for 24. In that 549, we're not asking, as Mr. Kent alluded to earlier, this year the legislature appropriated $100 million that we've been talking about the last couple of months. That's outside of MAEP. So in our ask for next year, we're not including that $100 million in general funds. We're asking the legislature, again, to fully fund MAEP. So that $100 million is not reflected in our general fund ask. So that's why you see the decrease of 101.
Dr. Gavin, if you don't mind my asking, because I don't understand, what's the Chickasaw School Fund?
Sherry, you want to explain that?
That is a court order. Goes all the way back to Chickasaw. So it's
It has to do with, there were some counties in North Mississippi that never had 16th section properties because they were in the original Chickasaw session when the Chickasaws were shipped out to Oklahoma. And so there was no 16th section lands that were given to those school districts. So in place of 16th section, they get a disbursement of cash to
Does that
take
go on for
place.
life?
Beg
Is that a
pardon?
lifetime
Yes.
endowment thing? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Dr. Gavin, one more time, the 101, go through that
Okay.
one more time for me.
So in our FY24 appropriation, the $100 million that we're all talking about, that money was appropriated to the agency outside of MAEP. So they allocated that to us in our general funds. So it's a line item in our general funds. It's outside of MAEP. But in our FY25 budget request, we're not asking for it as a separate line item. We're asking for full funding of MAEP. So technically that 100 million will be included in our funding for MAEP. So if we ask for this $100 million that they gave us this year based on ADM, and we ask for full funding, technically we would be asking for $100 million outside of full funding. So we're incorporating that $100 million into the full funding formula for MAEP.
That's what's got us a little bit in trouble this year, right? So if we don't request it, Can the legislators, can take away that $100 million next year?
Short answer is they
So-
do whatever they want to.
Well, I
but-
understand
Yeah.
that piece, but
So we're asking for it, we're just not asking for it as a separate line item. We're asking for it inside of the MAP formula.
on our document to them, we're making that point, is what you're saying.
Yes.
What I needed here. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
And we also, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Finish your thought.
We also have the teacher pay raise built into fully funding MAP, because that's what the law says, how we're supposed to calculate MAP. Now, if they decide to pull it out again like they did this year, then we would have to recalculate again the MAP formula. Because the law says that you include any adjustments to teacher pay raise, health insurance, life insurance, you include that as adjustments to your student-based costs. So that's the way that we're calculating it. Now, for '24, again, we have 3 funding streams for the districts. We have MAP, we have the $100 million, which is based on ADM, and we also have the teacher pay raise. So we have 3 separate funding sources. When we calculate MAP based on the law, we roll all of that into the calculation of MAP. So if they were to fully fund MAP, that would cover all of that. Does that make sense?
Just answered my question.
By
Next,
code,
next time I'll shut up and let you.
and by code, we have to do that, right? By code, we have to prepare the budget this way.
Yes. Now,
One
if
last
they
que-
come back during the session and appropriate different, then we'll go back in and calculate MAP based on whatever they tell us to. But when we present it by law, this is the way that we're supposed, it's outlined in statute, how you calculate it.
Other question, I want to make sure that I heard it right. We got an increase in PERS. In this budget, we're including that increase to send to local school districts to make up for it, or are local school districts going to be on the hook to do that work?
We will include it, as an adjustment to the student-based cost. Like I said, we didn't receive our month 9 numbers in time to include it. We typically don't, but we've calculated, and it's gonna be about a $230 increase to the student-based cost for PERS. So when we calculate MAP at full funding, we will include that additional PERS in our formula. Now, they may choose to pull it out and fund it separately, just like they do the teacher pay raise, PERS. And so we'll have that number, what that cost will be, which is right now, it's gonna be, we're estimating about $230 as an adjustment to the student-based cost. So we will request that the legislature fund that. When we say we're fully funding MAP, that calculation will be included in that.
But there is an opportunity or a chance that they can send that bill to the local school districts if they don't fund it to what we request, right?
There's certainly that chance, yes. Any other questions? Okay, so now we will, any more, I'm sorry. Oh. So we will move to each program area. Dr. Boone will discuss with you her request under the Office of Chief Academic Officer.
Okay, I'm going to give you the Cliff Note version of this because there's a lot here in case unless you have questions. In the early childhood education area, we're asking for an increase of 1.4 million over last year. Because of the fact we need more early childhood coaches. We currently have 37 collabs right now, 11 districts in the SIP, and that's 200 classrooms. That's under the state-invested pre-K program, not inside the collabs. We've done a lot of contract work. You know that we were cut positions this year. Some of those positions were in this area, which is why we've had to go to contract workers rather than having PINs, those permanent funding, the permanent positions here at the department. So that's where we are with early childhood ed programs. You know, we were given that additional 20 million this year for the additional SIP, which is out right now for applications. You'll be seeing those at the August board meeting. Then we're asking for an additional $357,000 in the area of the Literacy-Based Promotion Act. This is to provide more support in those areas. We have next week what we call our Acceleration Academy for the F school districts on the 20th and 21st For those districts that hit the list and that are an F school, we would like to put someone in there more than 2 days a week. And so this additional funding would allow us to put a coach in there to help them more days a week than we currently are. Then you'll see the expansion of professional development. Right now, we will not have enough money to cover the salaries of the PDCs. That's why we're asking for that increase. And as Dr. Gavin said previously, we have more and more schools being identified here that needs the support. Dropout prevention, an increase of $119,000 for an additional person to help look at the plans and help school districts decrease their dropout rate. And then we're also asking for the $500,000 in the Superintendent's Academy to reinstate those. Earlier this year, I went to look at and Mr. East, you will understand this when I say this, right now, in the state, there's only 18 superintendents who have 10 or more years' experience. There are 85 superintendents who have 5 years or less experience. And we have 7 interims by the time I did that list. But since then, we have more interims, and we know of at least 11 superintendents who are leaving this year. So the leadership piece is huge. Mississippi School for Math and Science, I'm going to tell you that that number is not correct. We have a new director there, and filling out these budget sheets, he put things in the wrong pockets, and we fixed that. So his overall budget is $4.7 million, not $10.4 million, which is an increase of $709,000 over last year. He's trying to add 4 additional positions in FY '25, which would be a business manager and an additional math science teacher and an administrative assistant. He also would like to have a school bus. The Mississippi School for the Arts is asking for an increase for an additional position, a part-time nurse, and just increase in operating cost. Each one of our state schools is asking for an increase for that. In secondary ed, we're asking for another $250,000 to support our districts of innovation, our counseling services, and our curriculum development. Our school improvement, as I mentioned earlier, an increase there in order to have more staff to help support those schools that are identified. The detention centers, we're going to change that from $2.9 million to $3 million because we can do a 3% increase. The numbers that we gave to the legislature for the 2.975 last year were based on 2 years ago funding. We know costs have increased. We also know now that we've come out on the other side of COVID, there may be more students being served. So we're going to ask for an increase there. Then on page 18, Dr. Gavin will tell you that's just...
Yeah, that's just a summation there. You'll see this on each chief's area. The first column just represents by program office what our total ask is in general funds. And then the second column, if we're asking for EEF dollars, which you'll see 16.2, we typically get that in the pre-K program here. And then the third column just adds up our total requests by program. And then the next column, it was what we actually received in FY '24, and the last column is a variance. And I'm going to bring your attention to this, and you'll see this on several of the slides. For FY '24, if you remember just a couple of slides back, I said the department has 9.5 that we use to operate on in terms of general funds. Well, that number is about 20% less than what we have seen in what our appropriation has been in the previous years. So we were actually, once we subtract out all the flow-through items and MAP, we were left with about 20% less than what we had to operate on in FY '23. So you will see on each upcoming slide where the chiefs are asking to restore funding back to our FY '23 number, because as it stands right now for FY '24, starting July 1, we will actually have a freeze on hiring until we're at a point where we can see that our FY '24 number is going to, be sufficient to take us through the end of FY '24 based on that 20% cut that we're seeing overall. So you will see on each slide that we're asking to restore funding to the FY '23 level.
Dr. Boone, this gives you the money to inspect what we expect of everybody, right, to make sure
Yes,
everything's
sir,
going
that's what
well?
we're trying to get to.
Okay, thank you.
And now I will say, with the hiring freeze, it's gonna be tough for a little while, but for FY '25, that's where we're headed.
I think that's very important.
On slide, page 19, it shows that there's the difference for MSMS of that 4.6 million in that category. You told me that number is wrong, right?
Correct, correct.
What would the difference be?
The
Or what should it
MS.
be if you filled out the form right?
Go back. MSMS should have been 4.7 instead of 10.4.
So I think you're saying he overstated his
Right.
ask by
It's an
6 million.
increase of 709,000 is all he's asking for.
Not 4.6 million.
No, sir. No, sir.
Got you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
when I saw that, raised my eyebrows as well. I thought, are we building a building?
I got you.
Increasing homeowners?
709,000.
709,000. And that's to cover 4 additional positions, a bus, and his operating cost.
So when you'll get this document again in July, and any changes that we make today will be reflected in what you approve in July?
And then on page 20 is career technical, and you will see that our request includes an additional 200,000. I'll go ahead and tell you what we're looking at there. If a school district offers early childhood as one of the CTE programs, the pre-PAC certification that goes along with that does not result in anything. We would like to change that to a CDA. That would cost $425, I think, per student. And so we're trying to find a way of districts not having to come out of pocket for that. If they take the CDA, they can immediately become a teacher assistant. That immediately puts them in the pipeline to go to one of our universities who are taking those teacher assistants in a cohort program and moving them to becoming a teacher. So we think that the CDA is results in a better future for the kids and also addresses our teacher shortage as well. So that's what the $200,000 increase request there is. And that wraps mine up. If you have any more questions.
Okay, if not, Dr. Vanderford, Office of Chief Accountability.
Good afternoon. Fortunately for me, I think, and you as well, between Mr. Kent and Dr. Gavin's presentation on both the legislative and the fiscal priorities, most of the areas highlighted under the Office of Accountability has already been mentioned. But I'll just start with MCOPS. We are and have been requesting an additional $1 million in MCOPS funds. With a focus on school safety, we are seeing an increase in demand for these grants. As you see in FY '23, we funded 198 officers in 294 schools. And we were unable to in the previous, I'm sorry, we did change that bullet. So this is what we're going to ask the board to award in FY '24. Let me go back to FY '23. We expended all of the funds, and we were unable to fund an 85 officers that were requested in the district. So we could have used in FY '23 an additional $850,000 on top of the $2 million that we received. And I do apologize. After a conversation with Dr. Gavin, we went back and wanted to show you for FY '24 what we will be asking the board to approve. So we already are seeing more requests moving into FY '24 than funds that we have. So we would like to see an additional $1 million there.
Last year, we couldn't fund 86, what'd you say?
85, we were 85 short
Thank you.
in request in round 2. So we've in the previous years, we've been doing 2 rounds of MCOP grants. So this year, all of our funds that we're requesting the board to approve has been expended in round 1, so there should not be a round 2 unless some of the districts approved by the board decline the grant. The Office of Test Security, Dr. Gavin has already mentioned this need. This is a request that we make throughout years, and we've made it throughout the past several years to Mr. Eastpoint to meet the requirements of monitoring districts in accordance with federal requirements. The statewide assessment system, we're asking for an increase of $2.6 million over our FY24 funding, and to Dr. Gavin's point that she made, we're asking for that additional 20% that we saw moving into 24 for that decrease in contractual and/or in our contractual budget there. And this is just due to the increase in the cost of online assessment systems. The accreditation review teams, that we have not had this funding in a number of years, and we continually see a need to reinstate that process to do these unannounced, limited audits of our monitoring visits in school districts. So we would like to restore that. Mr. Kent mentioned the licensure call center. We have established that call center with our one-time federal funding, and that will expire in September of '24. The licensure call center has certainly served us well, and we would certainly hope to be able to continue that after the federal funding has been exhausted. And the same with our MECA system. We utilized federal funding to have this system implemented, and we are asking for an increase of $423,000 to support the portals that make up MECA. Primarily, the one for licensure is the greatest expense, followed by the PGS. And then slide 25, again, as Dr. Boone and Dr. Gavin have mentioned, is just the summary of the ask on the previous pages.
I'll ask you the same question, that the money for the call centers, that gives us a way to survey and make sure it's going well and doing what it's supposed to do?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next, we have our Chief Information Officer, Mr. Kramer, to discuss his FY25 needs.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So we have a proposed increase of $1.3 million that is a little bit complicated in terms of explaining the changeover, which will be a little bit clearer when we get to the next slide. But for the moment, we're asking for is a restoration of the cuts that we've seen, as Dr. Gavin has already explained, with an additional 4 positions that have been currently funded through ESSER dollars, as well as a restoration for our district network engineer services that we provide. So when it was South Delta, when the tornadoes went through, we had our engineers go out and help them get their connection restored. The biggest chunk of this request, though, is for the continuation of MSIS 2.0 once we go into operations next summer. The breakdown is about 2/3 of it is in staff. A good chunk of the rest is in software, including the cloud services that we'll be utilizing, and a large chunk for travel to allow us to provide training across the state to districts and other users around Mississippi. So this would be really an ask of 3.5 roughly million for MSIS would be a new EEF request that would then replace the reappropriations we've been doing over the last couple of years of a one-time $7.6 million funding from the legislature. That's been spent down over the last 2 years and will be spent down again. The final will be spent this coming fiscal year, but then that leaves a hole in our budget that you'll see in a minute when we get to the next slide. So as you can see, under OTSS operations from 24, we're about $2 million, little over $2 million. We're asking with that restored money and the 4 new positions to get up to about $3 million. That's where the big chunk of that is coming in. The engineers restoration would be in under the regional hub services from 1.77 up to $177,000 to $260,000. But then you can see in FY24 we're going to be spending the reappropriated balance, remaining balance of our MSIS one-time money, and we're asking for a similar fund of just over 3.4 million as an ongoing operational expense to become part of our ongoing recurring funding rather than special one-time funds. So that is pretty much trying to stay about as level as possible. When you add in the $1 million of restored staffing and the new positions, that gets us from 5.7 up to 7 million, pretty much the bulk of that. And then it's really, but depends on the continuation of that MSIS funding as an ongoing appropriation. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I will walk the board through the remainder of the presentation. Under the Office of General Counsel, we're basically asking for level funding over FY23 to just restore that $51,000 that we were cutting in FY23. And this would allow us to make sure that we have funds for reporting services for non-renewal hearings or public hearings that are required under APA. Again, this is a depiction of the total request compared to FY24. Office of Educational Accountability requesting 1 additional pen there, and restoration of our FY23 funds for a total of an additional $287. We were cut 1 position in that area, as well as additional funding, so we're asking to restore those funds. Office of Chief Operation, our request excludes the $4.7 million. When I talked to you earlier about the $7 million that we're requesting in flow-through items, the total amount that we typically get in flow-through items is somewhere north of $11 million, and $4.7 million of that is not necessarily items that are board priorities. Those are just items that get included in our budget, so we never request those. So again, we're not requesting those particular line items. And here you also see that we're back to the 100 million, where we're not asking for that under the Office of Operations. We're asking for that 100 million in full funding of MAP. And this is the details under the Office of Chief Operations. Office of Communications,
Dr. Gavin?
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Certainly.
On page 33, 700,000, world-class teachers, is that a program that they go through?
It is a program that's under Dr. Vanderford's office for some of our teachers. Dr. Vanderford, you want to explain the program? It's a flow-through item that goes really to the universities. It's really managed through IHL. It's just one of
Okay.
those items that are in our budget.
Thank you.
One of the $4.7 million items that are in our budget that we don't necessarily ask for.
Gotcha.
Basically, these are programs that come through but count on our budget when they talk about our budget, but they're really not our money to spend.
Correct. Yes, sir.
But counts on our budget when it goes public.
Yes.
Dr. Gavin, do you happen to know, can you put a percentage, when we talk about MDE's budget, do you know what percentage off the top of your head roughly fits in that category of just strictly flow-through money?
We have about $11 million.
So it's over 10%. Is that right?
Well, about 83% of our budget is MAP.
Okay.
If you look at page 11, actually starting at page 10, you can see about 84% of our total budget is MAP, about 3% is CTE, then the Chickasaw is 0.5%. And then when you get to general education, what we call general education, MDE other, that's about 13%. And those are funds that go directly out to the school districts outside of MAP. And that's another $450 million there. And included in that number, you can see several items we have listed there. The teacher pay raise, the MCOPS, the grant that we talk about. So any grants, the pre-K, any of those services that are direct support to the district that we don't use inside the agency to operate, that's in that 13%. And then when you get through the flow-throughs there, 7.7 million is what we asked for. And then there's an additional additional 5 million that we do not ask for, but it's always in our budget. And even some of the direct support to the school district, some of those numbers are not necessarily things that we ask for either, but it's in our budget. But most of the items in the flow through, with the exception of this 7 million, are items that we don't necessarily ask for. 3% of the total flow
3% of the
throughs.
total counting MAEP? MAP is by
And you pull
codes.
that out, it's
You
probably,
pull that out, what percentage, is that where it might get the 10 or 11% from, you think? You got no control over the MAP, that is what it is.
right.
Yeah, I
So if
mean,
you pull that number out, because that's 87% of our budget. So when you hear the talk that MDE has the largest budget, we're sending that money directly out the door, even on the flow through items.
I think
Those items go directly. We do a first half and a second half allotment straight out to wherever they're appropriated to.
I think what we'll try to do is get you some kind of rough calculation, just that's water cooler information, that out of this, you know, when our budget is discussed, it's always hundreds of millions. But you don't have, this agency does that, we don't have that kind of money. The vast majority of the money flows through this agency on to other entities. Just like that page of information right there, that's not our discretion. That's flow-through. MAEP is flow-through. And so when people are throwing these hundreds of $1 million figure about, you know, Bill Jacobs, what are y'all doing with that $500 million? Well, we don't have five. About 490 of it is scattered in other places.
Well, or another way to answer it is, what are you doing with the money? What the
Okay.
legislature tells us to do with it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, an example of that is recent dollars that were appropriated that can only be spent on literacy coaches. Dollars that were appropriated that can only be spent on school attendance officers. So you're exactly right. Your discretion is, you don't have much discretionary money.
Yeah. Well, or another way to say it is that whatever percentage that is, 87, 88% is non-discretionary funding.
Yeah, and when you look on page 11, that 9.5 million general education MDE operations, that's really the amount that we operate. And of course, we have federal programs and we get federal dollars that some of our staff is paid from. But in terms of state dollars, that's what's left to operate the agency, the $9.5 million, which is less than 1%. Yes, less than 1%, less than 0.5%.
Is it fair of us to
That's
ask for,
shocking to you.
fair of us to ask for just a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that said, here are the funds that are controlled by Mississippi Code, and here are the funds that are controlled by our discretion? And am I asking the question deep enough? You see what I'm
I
saying?
think there's a third component. You have code, you have legislative discretion,
Okay,
because they make appropriations like
And then we
The
have this,
first 10 or so on this, on the screen right there, and then the third part is what we have discretion over.
Tell you what, we'll get you a document that will spur further conversation, but I think it's important you realize that the actual dollars that this agency has to make decisions about what we're gonna do fits in that 9 million, not
Right.
in that.
and that's the piece of paper I'd like to see, Mike.
Yes, sir, that's exactly what I'm telling you.
That's what I'm asking, is how can we do
Yeah,
that?
we have
And- and
something like
Put it
that.
based on code, and I like Mr. Miller's suggestion, here's a legislative throw-through, here's what the code requires us to do, and here's our operational expense, how many employees do we have in this building, you know, et cetera. On accountability, that office kind of does our internal work. They audit and they do things to make sure that everything's going according to Hoyle. Is that the main purpose of that office?
Yeah, wait, which accountability?
Office of Educational Accountability,
That's Sonia's shop.
31. And her role is to go through and audit, make sure systems are going correctly, make sure we're following our own guidelines and procedures, right?
That's correct. That
I'll ask her the
internal-
same question. You got enough money to do that inspection of what we expect in that budget?
Sonia? She actually requested an additional position in her area. This includes 3 different areas, ed accountability area, Office of Reporting, which is Donna Hill. She does all the public reporting. Anytime we get tons of requests for public information,
Okay.
that office handles that. And Office of Internal Accountability, that's internal audit, correct? And so they are, I think, currently working on a,
So they're the ones that will catch us if we're doing something that.
Before
we
the
gotta
external
get it
people.
straightened out. We get it straightened out before the real auditor comes in and says you're doing something. And so that helps, this extra money helps with that process then. is what-
that's correct.
In our district, her name's Debbie Hawkins. That's why I was asking if that's the same. thing. She's the one the superintendent walks down and says, go look at that. Count for her.
I think, and the last area is the Office of the State Superintendent. That's basically nothing there is there other than the operation of the superintendent's office staff. And then only increase there is just 130,000, asking for restoration of funds to the FY '23 level. I did. I thought I did.
So at the end of the
Yes.
day, our cover letters is going to have to explain that the reason we have unfunded PINs is because we used ESSER dollars in the short term for those. And what I think I hear you saying is, we're going to go back and ask now for what we should have been funded, that we've saved the state taxpayers' dollars, but push it to the federal level.
Yes, it actually will be 2 different things. The first is we're asking for restoration of funds back to our FY '23 level, which is different from ESSER, the ESSER piece. We were cut in that $9.5 million that you saw in what we have discretion over. Once all those items, the flow-through items, the legislative requirements, the federal requirements, all of that's taken out, we were left with about 20% less than we have been operating on. In FY '24, we were less than 20% than we had in FY '23. In
Yeah, but
addition, in
is
FY
that people?
'24,
Is that people or is that
That's
supplies
total
and
dollars.
whatever else we need?
just dollars. But we were cut 26 positions. But we're a lump sum agency, so they don't allocate based on categories. We get lump sum funding. So that number, once we pulled out all the flow-through items, all the things we had to do that were line item in our bill, we were left with 20% less than we had in '23. And I'm talking the year that will start in July '24.
And you're
When
talking
we-
about our discretionary funds, the little 9 million that we're asking about?
Yes,
Okay,
that is
thank you.
20% less than we had in FY '23. When we start July of 2023, it will be 20% less than we had the previous year. So we're asking to restore that 20%. In addition to that, we're also asking for new money to fund, like the teacher licensure center, everything associated with MSIS 2.0, all those projects that were associated with ESSER funds that we want to continue, which obviously is the call center for one, and certainly MSIS 2.0. We will need funding from the state to cover that, because those ESSER dollars will expire September 2024.
So I've used the call center myself twice, very good product, but I think we need to make sure that everybody gets to weigh in on the effect, that's why I asked about that effectiveness of that call center. It's- I've used it twice in the last 10 days, got great service, but I just want to make sure everybody's getting the same, because we need it.
Service,
It's a
right.
good, it's a good process.
Any other questions?
Any questions? Motion first, let me say this. Thank you very much for the work.
Thank you.
I know that the budget time of year is probably the most difficult time because you're dealing with everything under the sun, plus working on the next year. So thank you very much for that time and energy that you put into that. Any other comments from board members about closing out the year? And we'll approve the budget at the July meeting.
Yes, along with the MAP portion of it.
And then this document will then be included in our just normal board agenda for that meeting, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Motion to allow Mary to get on the highway and go home.
I'll make that motion.
Adjourn. Ms. Wonder, motion to adjourn, second? Bill
Thank you,
Jacob?
Bill.
All in favor? Any opposed? Been a pleasure working with you guys today. See you all tomorrow.